Hello folks, Phil Gallagher aka Thraben, and you here for another Pathfinder 2nd Edition video, and welcome to Managing Resources in PF2E. Before I get going here, I want to make kind of a big announcement. I'm going to make a serious push on this channel for growth. For those of you that don't know, my primary channel is Magic the Gathering focused. I've got about 30,000 subscribers on there, and that's my primary job. And I've been making videos on this channel as a labor of love, but I'm going to try to take this channel a little more seriously for the next 3 months. Every Friday in April, May, and June, I'm going to release a video on this channel. And I am hoping to grow the channel. I would like to get my metrics to the point where I could look at sponsorships for this channel, and I would like to get the ad revenue a little bit higher on this channel, so it makes sense for me to keep making this content at this rate. I'm obsessed with this system. I love this system so much. Help me make more videos for this awesome system. Help me get more eyes on this system. So as of right now, at the beginning of this little challenge to myself here, I have about 2,000 subscribers. Now, all I'm saying is my last couple of videos have done really well for a channel of this size. I've had 4,000 or 6,000 views. And if I were to get a decent portion of those people to subscribe to this channel, I would massively grow this channel. So I could sit here and do the YouTuber, please like, comment, and subscribe thing every single video while I make this push, or we could just kind of use this as an opportunity to click that subscribe button if you are enjoying this content. Now, if you are in the position to kick a couple of bucks my way, YouTube members are going to be getting early access to all of my videos during this time period. And if you have some content you would like to see me make, if you enjoy my analytical skill set and you want to see what I think of X class or compare X to Y, consider reaching out. I will be taking donations for video topics. This is something I am starting actually at the request of one of my regular followers from my Magic channel who also plays Pathfinder. And they have donated to have me analyze the Swashbuckler, and that will be next Friday's video. If you want me to cover a specific topic, we'll probably be looking at something like a $50 donation just to kind of kick something towards my time for researching and producing these videos. It takes a while to make something like what I do. Feel free to reach out via Gmail, Discord, Twitter, Blue Sky, whatever. I'm not particularly hard to find. So, with that being said, this should be the start of something awesome for this channel. Fingers crossed. Let's see how it goes. So, what are we doing today? I'm going to talk to you about different types of resources in Pathfinder first and just talk about some basic theory stuff. It'll go pretty quickly. I don't think the concept itself is that hard, and I think applying it to different types of tables is much more interesting. So I'm going to focus on how your GM's preferences, what sort of combats they like to run, how many combats they like to run in a day, might change your expenditure of resources. And then I want to think about what you can do to conserve your party's resources. And I'm really going to dig into the Kineticist today. Much of what I am going to talk about today is particularly relevant to you if you play Pathfinder through the video game Dawn's Buried Days. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the video. So, resources. You can kind of call them what you want to call them. But in Pathfinder, there are resources that are limited, and there's resources that are refreshing. So your limited resources are going to be things like spell slots that you only get to use so many times, and then they are done. Many classes have features that can be used only once a day because they are particularly strong. Some things like battle medicine can only normally be used once a day unless you are taking some follow-up feats to change that. And sometimes you have consumable items. You have potions, you have scrolls, single-use consumables of other natures that, if you use them, they're gone forever, not just gone for the day. And then you have refreshing resources that you can very easily get back. Your focus points come back after 10 minutes each. Your HP is more or less an infinitely renewable resource, considering how widespread healing is in this system. There are tons of abilities that refresh once every X number of minutes, once every 10 minutes, once every hour that are pretty easy to get back. And some classes even have things that come back very quickly. The alchemist has a consumable type called versatile vials that can pretty easily refresh in between combats as well. So it's very easy to spend refreshing resources without thinking about it, but your limited resources you might need to give a little bit more thought to. When do I actually want to use my battle medicine if I only can use it once a day? Per individual, that is. Is this situation dire enough for me to want to do that? Am I saving this battle medicine to bring someone back when they fall down? Am I saving this battle medicine until I think, if I use it now, I can probably keep you from going down to the next hit? You've got some things to think about, and your exact circumstances might change how you think about those things. And let's think about spell slots here. This is going to be a little bit of an extreme example, but I think this will illustrate the point well. So, you're a 6th level party. You're a sorcerer. You have a total of 12 spell slots. And that's not counting your focus points either. You can kind of throw spell slots around all the time without thinking about it very much. You might not need to use your cantrips very often. You'll still certainly use them, but you can rely on spell slots for many turns of most combats. Now let's look at your magus, who has a total of 4 spell slots at this level. Your magus might end up spell striking with cantrips rather than spell striking with their valuable spell slots in many cases. And this is going to be more and more true the longer your adventuring day gets. So depending on how much of a resource you have, how valuable each one of those resources is to you is going to change. And with resources, you're always trying to walk this line. If you use too many resources, when something difficult comes up later, you might not have the right tool or enough raw power, enough oomph left to finish that encounter. A really easy example here, if you have blown all of your 2nd level spell slots and now you don't have something that is going to let you see that invisible enemy, that can be very problematic, right? If you don't have that nice fairy fire or equivalent in your toolkit, now that scenario went from solved in 1 spell slot to, oh no, this thing's really hard for our martial characters to hit, and maybe you need to retreat for a little while. Or worse, you TPK, you total party kill. But what happens if you use too few spell slots in a fight? Well, let's imagine that it starts to go bad. 1 player goes down. In other systems like Dungeons & Dragons, I do not feel like this is a very punishing thing. Oop, healing word, you're back, everything is better. In Pathfinder 2nd Edition, a character going down is horrifying. It usually takes about 2 player actions to get a downed character up. That might be a stride, and that might be a battle medicine. That might be a 2-action heal. But it probably takes about 2 actions to get a character back up, potentially expending a limited resource when you do so. That downed character is then going to take 2 to 3 actions to reset themselves. They are going to stand, they are going to pick up 1 or 2 things that were just in their hands, and now, if you have a 4-person party, that was probably half of your entire turn rotation, your turn cycle, right? 1 person used their actions to get you back up. You used your actions to reset yourself. That means you didn't do much to that enemy in that turn cycle. Maybe even worse, you triggered a reactive strike when you stood up, and you took another massive hit, maybe going down again. And so this process might end up repeating, and you might end up in a death spiral situation where things get worse and worse and worse, and it turns into a very scary battle of attrition, which perhaps could have been prevented if you opened up with that fireball and weakened all that enemies, or you used a massive debuffing spell to start off the fight and make the scary enemy less scary. What are you actually trying to do here? You are trying to end the combat while expending as few limited resources as possible. You want to walk into the next potential fight, maybe there won't even be another one, but into the next potential fight with as many of your resources left as possible. But you don't want to get greedy with it. You don't want to put yourself or your party in danger. So, if you can start by using your refreshing resources, you might be able to save more of your limited resources or when you actually need them. So, in terms of character creation, if you can get yourself that extra focus point, you might be able to carry your spell slots a little bit further on into the adventuring day. And so, you should be looking for opportunities to generate limited resources to help yourself. And at this point, I think you should start to think about what sort of table you are playing at in terms of resource expenditure and what you are expecting from your GM. Because despite the fact that any Pathfinder game is probably going to be using more or less the exact same rules, you might have very different tendencies and expectations for what you want from the system. So let's look at 3 different table types here. Table type 1, your GM is like a traditionalist. You're running things like you might see in a Pathfinder Society scenario. You've got a long adventuring day with a handful of small combats, probably ending in one more significant, harder fight of some kind. And throughout this long adventuring day, you are expecting time in between combats. You are expecting relative safety between combats. So you're going to have all the time you need to treat wounds. You're going to have all the time you need to refocus, get back your temporary renewable resources. So if you are at this table, you are always expecting your HP to come back in between combats because you are healing up via treat wounds or whatever way you have of healing your party. And so, if a PC goes down and takes a ton of damage within a fight, that is not the end of the world. There is a low degree of danger in between the combats, meaning that you get to rest. And so you can probably expend some degree of spell slots within each one of the encounters that you come across. But if you can do things like use temporary resources before you use your limited resources, you are probably going to be better off. Now, at these sorts of tables, there is very low danger overall. Generally speaking, I have not felt like there was any chance of player death in most of the Pathfinder Society games that I played. I have played some, I forget exactly what you call them. I've played some longer modules that were meant to be run over the course of an entire day, over like 12 hours, where things did get a little more dicey at times, involving some things like haunts or like level +2, level +3 solo bosses, that sort of stuff. Well, generally speaking, I have not felt a great degree of danger when I am in situations where I'm going to get to refresh all of my cool resources. And Pathfinder Society games hand you consumables at the beginning of the day. They will give you potions or scrolls of heal or whatever. In most cases, you're probably not going to need those. If you have the time to just treat wounds back to full, you maybe don't need those potions. They're there in a pinch, they're a great safety net, but you probably don't need them to make it through your day. Well, let's consider a different table type. The Fear. Your DM is running a tense, scary dungeon crawl. There is uncertainty. The area is unsafe. There are traps. You might be ambushed in between combats. Healing is not guaranteed. Time to refresh your focus points is not guaranteed. While the PF2E math generally dictates that you should be walking into most fights at full HP and with a decent degree of your resources, maybe this GM, wants to make it more tense. And so you might trigger a trap, and when that trap goes off, the monsters in the next room hear you and you roll initiative. And that's cool. Like that is narratively satisfying, right? But this is a very different sort of game than the previous table. If when you finish combat, your GM says, okay, you get 10 minutes to do stuff for free, then we're going to start rolling encounter checks to see if anyone finds you. Or, okay, you did that, but if you want to do it again, now you're going to roll a stealth check to see if you stay hidden from the enemies that are hunting you while you're doing that. And if your GM is doing stuff like this, the way that you spend resources is going to be just totally different. It's going to be night and day. So at this table, your HP matters a lot more, right? If you are not guaranteed to full heal in between encounters, then you would like to end the encounter at a higher hit point total. And now your HP is not a refreshable resource that is just coming back 100% of the time after every combat. It becomes a limited resource when it normally isn't. So at a table like this one, you might actually be incentivized to use other limited resources, such as spell slots, to preserve your HP, which now has become a limited resource. And at table 1, when the stakes were low and your focus spells were always going to be coming back, you would just kind of, by basic theory, want to spam all of your focus spells before you start using your spell slots. Well, now what if one of your focus spells is a really good utility thing? It has the ability to, say, blind or dazzle enemies. You also have one that deals damage. You want to use all 3 of those focus points to just blast, 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 when you might need to, send out a big dazzling cone in the next combat. Well, now you might want to hold back just one focus point so that tool is still in your toolkit if the enemy randomly receives reinforcements mid-battle or shortly after battle. And at this table, where you might not have time to treat wounds multiple times, that big old pile of potions that is maybe rotting in your pack in the first campaign is maybe really useful here. I can tell you on my current character, I have 8 potions in my bag. I've never used a potion in this entire campaign, nor do I expect that I ever will use a potion. But if I was playing at this table, alright, I treat wounds once, and, I'm still pretty low. I'm going to chug a couple of potions to top myself off before we open this next door. Totally different experience. Now, I usually play at a story-driven table, where we don't have very many encounters every day, but the encounters that we have are tough. Our table mostly plays severe and extreme encounters. So we're going to see few enemies in encounters, but it is very frequently going to be boss and 2 generals, or solo level boss that is, very, very tough. And in these sorts of tables, in these sorts of tables, you're going to see more difficult enemies with scarier abilities, more status effects, that sort of stuff. And so at the tables where I'm playing, it's pretty common that every spellcaster leads a combat with a max level spell slot. You are going to use your resources liberally. You have to in these tougher fights. But the thing that you need to do is not exhaust your ability to do something that is important. So for example, if you are a healer of some kind, like let's say that you are a druid that can both blast and heal, you maybe don't want to give up your last blasting slot. You maybe don't want to give up your last healing slot. You want to preserve the ability to do different things that are important. But you have to be respecting the encounter difficulty because, well, they're severe and extreme. There is the real threat of PC death every single fight. But let's say you have 2 spell slots that target reflex, 2 spell slots that target will, 2 spell slots that target fortitude. Do you want to spam both when you learn that the boss's lowest save is fortitude, or do you want to save one of those for the next potential encounter in case that matters there? You've got some difficult choices to make. And in these really difficult encounters, you do not want the party members to go down. So you want to preemptively, use that max level heal slot to keep party members up, because having a party member go down and having to waste half of your action economy for that turn cycle, getting them back up and resetting them back to a neutral position is very scary when the monsters are able to delete most of your HP bar in a single turn. And in these difficult tables where you are only, facing a couple of encounters, but they're really hard, you oftentimes have to use your spell slots or your other limited resources to make the numbers swing in your favor a little bit. So, we just talked about a scenario where you have to be spending your spell slots. You have to be using your limited resources. But the whole point of this video is trying to learn, well, what can we do to conserve those resources, even if we do have to spend them? We want to make sure we're winning scenarios, but we also don't need to be the person who finishes the game with 99 potions in their bag. There's a balance to walk here. So, how do you help your party not use their resources? And my biggest tip is just play smart. HP that is saved is HP that does not need to be healed. Skirmish fighting exists. The step action exists. You can, with your 3 actions, run in, hit, step away, or run away if you know that the monster does not have a reactive strike. Now that enemy needs to use an action to move up to you, and that means that it can't do something like 1 action attack, 2 action, really cool monster ability. It means it's going to have to pick one of those things. And that is denying a third of the enemy's action economy. And the fewer monsters there are, the more denying a single action from an enemy matters. It's putting it in kind of ridiculous terms, but if you step away from an enemy and it has to move to attack you, it's like you've just used the slow spell on them, right? They have lost an action that round. And you could keep doing that and kite that enemy a little bit. That's really strong and requires no class features or abilities. You can also do other things to prevent HP loss. You can raise a shield, use the shield block reaction, and make it so that the HP you have goes further. You can play a champion or a thaumaturge that has the ability to mitigate some damage and reduce damage, often by something like 2 plus your level, or 2 plus half your level. That's awesome, and that's something you can keep doing every turn. If you don't know what to do with a third action on your turn, you can try to do something that frees up some of your caster friends. So for example, you can battle medicine yourself before you start getting into a dicey situation. And maybe that is enough to keep them from using a heal spell on you in that specific combat. Now, in this case, you are using a limited resource, your battle medicine skill, but you are doing that to perhaps free up that max rank heal spell for a little bit later in the adventuring day. And that is a big strategic thumbs up. If you are fighting against a boss that is really hard to hit, well, maybe your demoralize action succeeds, and then your spellcaster isn't going to do something like a fear spell to reduce their AC. There's plenty of things of this general nature you can do to try to conserve resources. But let's start thinking about Pathfinder 2nd Edition in sort of video game terms, where you're building the whole party, you're controlling the whole party. What would you hypothetically put on your team so your resources aren't strained? And there is a Pathfinder 2nd Edition video game. It's called Dawnsbury Days. Full disclosure, I paid for the original version of this game. I was given the expansion that came out recently, the Profane Barrier, for free. This is not sponsored content. I just enjoyed this game, and I thought it would be a good time to talk about Pathfinder in these terms, because I think it's useful for thinking about resources. And while I was playing the Dawnsbury Days expansion, and honestly, the original game as well, I really grew to love the Kineticist in terms of party building. And I think the Kineticist is absolutely goated with the sauce, as the children say. Yes, they do actually say that sometimes. Trust me, I'm a middle school teacher too. Absolutely goated when it comes to resource conservation. They are the Energizer Bunny. They can just keep going and going and going and going. And they're so good at conserving their resources, including their HP. Why? Well, because their air quote strikes can happen up to 100 feet away from the enemy, meaning that they don't actually have to stride up to an enemy, meaning you don't have to move for your turn, meaning the enemy has to waste actions coming to you, maybe multiple actions if you start really far away, because you can pew 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 from up to 100 feet away. You also have resourceless casting with your impulses. That means you're not blowing spell slots. You can just keep doing them forever. And the biggest hoop you have to jump through is making sure your aura is on, which is done automatically at the beginning of combat, although you might have to reactivate it if you use something with the overflow trait. Kineticists have a surprising ability to do spellcaster things that might not be immediately apparent when you start reading this admittedly very complicated class. You can create difficult terrain, you can make enemies concealed, or let's rephrase that. You can create areas of concealment that make it so the enemies can't see you, and also you can't see the enemies. You can impose all sorts of cool status effects, and you can just keep doing this and doing this and doing this and doing this. And so I want to show off sort of why and how kineticists are just so very good at making their resources go further. Because when you have a kineticist in your party who does not need to expend any daily resources to do all of these cool things, this preserves the resources of the rest of the party. And I'm going to tell you, most of the time when I build parties in Dawnsbury Days, I am putting a kineticist on my team because they are so good at making it so my spellcasters can save their spell slots for the moments they actually need them. Let's look at why and how. We'll start with the obvious low-hanging fruit, Timber Sentinel, one of the best feats in the entire system. As a first level wood kineticist feat, you can infinitely cast the spell Protector Tree. Every turn, you can make a tree, and that tree will take hits instead of your allies. It is very, very strong. This is heightened as if it was a max level spell slot every turn. So if the only spell you want to cast is Protector Tree, your kineticist can infinitely do it at max level forever and ever and ever. This is incredibly powerful, and if you want to go through incredibly high difficulty combats, this is a way to cheese them. Now, something I want to caution you, as most of you watching this are probably not playing a video game, you're playing at a real life table. In a non-video game setting, is this actually going to be fun for you? Is this going to be fun for your party? Is this going to be fun for your DM? I want you to do some soul searching and seek the answer to that question. Because I'm going to tell you, when I'm sitting by myself in my room playing Dawnsbury Days, testing out character ideas for videos like this one, Timber Sentinel, very good. I enjoy using it. Would I enjoy waiting 10 minutes for my turn in combat and then go 2 action Timber Sentinel, 1 action Elemental Blast? I would not. Kineticists also have pretty good healing ability in combat. Maybe even using something like Dash of Herbs to go and remove status conditions as well. Now that's a really big deal. Confused, diseased, poisoned, sicken, seems great. Or you can just choose injuries and make the healing D10s instead of D8s. Confusion is really scary. I don't know if you have ever had a buffed fighter get confused before, but it is horrifying, and it is something that could lead to a TPK if you are not careful there. It is very, very, very scary. So having the ability to just go, no, you're better now, is awesome. And if you're at a table where there is not a lot of danger in between combats, abilities like Dash of Herbs, Ocean's Balm, or Fresh Produce could, over a period of time, produce full healing for the entire party. So you can use some decent in-combat healing to make it so someone else doesn't need to use a heal spell, and you can either speed up or supplement or be your only healer outside of party. Kineticists are also pretty good at targeting different shapes of AoEs. And I have 2 different things here, both of which are modal themselves. So the metal kineticists can get a shard strike, which can either be a 15-foot cone or a 30-foot line. That's really good as far as options go. Especially as you have larger parties and you have more friendly faces on the battle map, having the flexibility to turn one of your good things into a different shape so you don't hit your party members is really cool. Note there's also a kineticist feat, I believe, called Safe Impulses, that you can spend an extra action to keep your allies from getting hit if that is going to be a problem. Tidal Hands is really cool. You can do a big 30-foot cone, or you can do 2 cones off in different directions as long as they don't overlap. So there are other kineticist abilities that target bursts of various sizes or even emanations after you leap. And kineticists can pretty reliably target Fortitude, Reflex, and AC as defenses. One of the big upsides of playing a spellcaster is you can often target 3 or 4 of the defenses if you can also target Will. And that's going to vary a little bit depending on your spell tradition. So Kineticists can cover AoE, Kineticists can cover 3 of the 4 defenses. This is great. But your Kineticists can also mimic spell effects in a resourceless way. So a 6th level Kineticist can pick up Scrap Barricade, which is a wall. And I've just picked another random wall here. I picked Wall of Thorns, which is a 3rd level spell that you would be getting at about the same time. So your Kineticist's wall has AC 10, hardness 10, 20 hit points. Your Spellcaster's wall has AC 10, hardness 10, 20 hit points. That cost your Spellcaster a limited slot. That cost you no limited slot. Now, are there differences between these two things? Yeah, absolutely. The damage is a little bit different. The Kineticist's wall has to be sustained or it's going to go away. But you can do very, very close to Spellcaster things without consuming limited resources. So, you roll initiative. You roll high. There's 3 enemies in the room. 3 actions. Scrap Barricade. Bam. I cut off one of the enemies from the fight. I am totally fine sustaining that spell for a couple of turns until that enemy breaks through or until we have done something about the 2 enemies on the other side. That is a great use of my action economy, and it cost me nothing. And now, maybe my Spellcaster doesn't need to use a spell slot. Maybe they Electric Arc the 2 other enemies and do some action like a Demoralize to support the rest of the party. One of the things that Spellcasters are great at doing is imposing status effects on enemies. Well, Kineticists can do that too. I really like Rising Hurricane. This is a composite impulse, so you can only take this one if you are an air and a water Kineticist. But essentially, you make a giant hurricane that is going to lift people up in the air and then drop them. And when you drop them, they are going to be prone afterwards. Hey, you know what happens when you're prone? You have to use an action to stand up. So, you did a little bit of damage while also basically imposing a slow condition on the enemy. That is fantastic. You have wasted one of their actions. Huge, huge thumbs up there. And that, by the way, was in a 30-foot diameter cylinder. It's also 40 feet tall if you need to catch flying enemies in it as well, you know. Notably, the flying enemies would take the damage, but they would not be dropped prone. Wait, sorry, it takes falling damage normally unless it has a fly speed. JK. And Calcifying Sand is another really good one that can impose status effects. So this one is a reaction when you are hit with either an unarmed attack or a non-reach melee weapon. And this can only be done against each creature once per battle, realistically. So, on a failure, the creature is literally slowed 1. And on a critical failure, the target is petrified. Straight up petrified. You get turned into a rock. Now this one does have the incapacitation trait, so are you going to petrify the boss? No. That little wolf that ran up to you and chomped on you on turn 1? Sorry. It's a rock now. Kineticists actually get better than spellcasters at some things. The Witch Feet Cackle is incredibly strong. It takes a focus point, but as a free action, you are allowed to sustain a spell. Well, the Kineticists have effortless impulse as of level 12, which they can do on every single one of their turns to just immediately sustain one of your active impulses. Every turn. Forever. No focus points. Every turn. Free sustain. Every combat. All day. Kineticist is sending out flex emojis into the chat. This is incredibly powerful. And while the Kineticists say wall abilities might have started out looking worse than the spellcaster's walls, now all of a sudden they are at the same level, and the Kineticists do have some very powerful things with higher level feats that they can be sustaining, including some things that even just heal you. Sanguivalent Roots. It's awesome. Look it up. Now, I think it is easy to view the Kineticist through the wrong lens and be really disappointed with the Kineticist. And this happened recently in a Reddit post, and I've seen this exact comment multiple times before, where someone looks at a Kineticist and they're like, I'm not doing a lot of damage, my impulses aren't doing as much damage as these spells. I kind of feel disappointed with my character, but I don't think you're looking at your character's strengths properly. You're not built to be a martial. You can go in and two action impulse attack with melee impulses and do a decent chunk of damage. But you're not a fighter with bonus accuracy. You're not a barbarian with bonus rage damage. You're not rolling a d12 damage die. You've got disadvantages there. You aren't a true spellcaster that is operating on limited resources that get to be a little bit stronger. Instead, you are a flexible character that is going to never tire out, that is going to be great party support, and allow your friends who have limited resources to hang on to those resources for a little bit longer. If you are there to delete enemies and remove enemies from the map, the Kineticist is perhaps not necessarily the class for you. But if you want to be a good teammate, if you want to be a flexible teammate, if you want to always be reliable no matter how tough the adventuring day is, this class is awesome. P.S. Necessarily trying to optimize for damage all of the time doesn't end up creating the strongest characters. And I know the Kineticist gives you sort of low-hanging fruit for powering up your damage by being a single gate fire Kineticist. It gets to roll those chonky d8s instead of d6s. But you might just build a better Kineticist, a better party member by forking the path and choosing to go into more support for your character rather than trying to just make the damage numbers bigger all of the time. But let's say hypothetically that you're trying to build the entire party or you're working together with your friends to build your party. What do you want that party to look like to maximize your ability to use your resources wisely? So this is a party that I've played in Dawnsbury Days, and I've also played something very, very similar in a tabletop game as well. I love War Priest Clerics. They are one of my favorite generic characters to play. They're really good no matter how you choose to build them. You can go two-handed bastard sword for big dammies. You can go a one-handed weapon and a shield for a more defensive build. You could go a shield with a free hand for athletics maneuvers as well. So dealer's choice on how exactly you put them together. But your healing font will give you max level heals, and a lot of them. You can get some utility spells. You can get good at being an anti-undead turret. You can be a flanking buddy for your champion, who will be the next character. The champion's reaction is obviously really strong. We talked about that. Shield block, another good way to make HP go further. So you have a cleric who can burst heal well. You have a champion who every turn is going to be using that reaction, either to protect themselves or to damage an enemy while protecting an ally. That champion can also just have lay on hands for some healing and other good domain focus spells to give them utility. While many of the champion's turns are going to be very simple, a stride, a raise shield, and a strike, you can also strike and two-action focus spell. The Sun Domain focus spell, Dazzling Flash, I believe it is called, is particularly good in my opinion. It is a large cone that can dazzle and potentially blind enemies. Big fan of that one. Then you've obviously got your Kineticist, as I've been gushing about Kineticists this entire video. Basically, pick wood and then spin a roulette wheel and select your other gates, and you're going to be fine. The Kineticist does not necessarily need to have things in their hands to accomplish all their character goals. And in fact, you probably are going to have one hand free to be using your impulses, meaning that you could start the battle with a potion in your hand, or you could have a hand free for things like battle medicine or even trip. And you can round out the party with a non-divine full caster of some kind. You want to cover AoE and saves that the divine list isn't necessarily covering. This is where you want your lightning bolts or your fireballs and things like that nature. And if we're thinking about this in video game terms, you would love to be able to use all those cool scrolls of fireball and scrolls of whatever Cone of Cold is called now, Howling Blizzard, that you are going to pick up. And so a party like this one is going to be very good at beating just about any encounter. You have a bunch of renewable resources with things like focus spells on the champion, the Kineticist ability to do some healing, some damage mitigation, some AoE. The War Priest Cleric has a bunch of extra spell slots, meaning they don't have to be too conservative with their spell slots throughout the day. Healing Font is incredible as a class feature, and you're probably going to have a good time playing a party like this one. But let's end this by not thinking about video games, but by thinking about real TTRPG experiences. When you're building in this video game environment where you are designing everything exactly to beat all the difficult encounters and to win, trying to optimize your resources is really important. But in your average game, not every player needs to be perfectly optimized all the time to make it through these scenarios. And in fact, I think the math of the system is such, whereas if most players build an okay character, you're going to get through most things most of the time. But if one or two people in the party are building characters that are a little stronger, are playing a little smarter, are making it so that the other people don't have to be perfectly efficient at using all of their resources, you can give that party a little more wiggle room to be successful when things get tough. And with that, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day. See ya!